I'm not the kind of person who shares stuff like this online, but I haven't been able to sleep right since it happened. My name's Doug. I'm 42, work in construction back in Iowa, and this all went down last summer, mid-July. My son, Tyler, had just turned 16, and I thought it'd be a cool bonding thing to do a camping road trip. Just the two of us, no distractions, across Colorado. We'd been on the road for 5 days already, hopping from one state park to another, sleeping in a tent, cooking on a little propane stove. No set destination, just letting the road take us. Things felt good, peaceful even. But I keep replaying every second of that 6th day in my head, wondering how I missed the signs. It was around 10 in the morning when we saw the guy. We were heading west on a 2-lane road that cut through the hills outside Gunnison. There wasn't another car for miles, just pine trees, open sky, and that buzz you get in the middle of nowhere. The man was standing near a bent mile marker sign, thumbing for a ride. He had this worn army green jacket tied around his waist, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and short brown hair that stuck out from under a camo cap. Mid-30s maybe, thin build. He looked a little rough, like he hadn't slept much, but not dangerous. I slowed down. Tyler gave me that, "Are we really doing this?" look, but I just shrugged. The guy waved, pointed to the woods behind him, and said his car broke down about a mile up the trail. Said he had no cell signal and was just trying to get to the nearest gas station. He introduced himself as Mike. Said he was headed toward Montrose to meet his brother and had left his phone in the car by accident. His boots were caked with red dust, like he'd been walking for a while. Tyler was quiet, but polite. Mike sat in the back, behind me, and asked a lot of questions. Where we were from, where we were headed, how long we'd been on the road. The kind of stuff you'd expect. But he never talked about himself unless we asked directly. I didn't think much of it at the time. Some people just keep to themselves, but now those long silences feel different. Calculated. Like he was listening more than he was talking. We drove maybe another 15 minutes, winding through a stretch of dense trees. That's when we saw the SUV. Black, parked sideways across the road, blocking both lanes. 2 men stood in front of it, wearing what looked like tactical vests. One held a flashlight, the kind cops use, even though it was broad daylight. They stepped into the road and waved us down. One flashed a badge, looked legit from where I was sitting, and said they were with local law enforcement doing routine backcountry checks. I rolled down the window, already feeling that little tug of unease in my gut. The guy asked me to step out, then told Tyler and Mike to do the same. Before I could say anything, I felt cold metal against the back of my neck. The second man had circled around and was pointing a gun at me. Everything moved fast after that. They forced us to our knees by the side of the road. One of them, bigger guy, shaved head, dark sunglasses, zip-tied my wrist so tight I couldn't feel my fingers after a few minutes. Tyler was crying quietly beside me, and I remember trying to tell him it was gonna be okay, even though I didn't believe it. Mike, though, he barely flinched. He just stared at the ground, jaw clenched like this wasn't his first time in a situation like that. I looked at him, hoping for something, some kind of reassurance, but he didn't even look back. That's when it really started to sink in that we had no idea who the hell we'd picked up. They threw us in the back of a dark gray van, the kind with no windows. It reeked of gasoline and something else, something metallic, like dried blood or rust. There were blankets stuffed along the walls and the floor was lined with black plastic sheeting. No one said a word for the first 10 minutes. Then the driver started asking questions. Not to us. To Mike. Where were you headed? Did anyone see you out there? Are you carrying anything? It wasn't a robbery. They didn't ask for our wallets or phones. They weren't interested in us at all, just him. Me and Tyler, we were just collateral, bystanders who got too close. They drove us deep into the woods, way off any road I recognized. Eventually, we stopped at this old cabin, more like a hunting shack, really. The wood was warped, paint peeling, windows boarded up from the inside. There was a tall radio antenna next to it, wired with something that hummed. The big guy shoved us out of the van, led us into a room with no furniture except for a folding table and a few chairs. That's where they separated us. They dragged Mike into another room and left me and Tyler zip-tied in the corner, sitting on the floor. We could hear them yelling, mostly the two guys, but Mike was quiet. Too quiet. Tyler was shaking so hard I had to lean against him to keep him from tipping over. He kept whispering, "Why are they doing this? What do they want?" I didn't have an answer, but I kept thinking about how calm Mike had been, like he knew exactly what was going to happen. The weirdest part? When they dragged him past us, one of the men said, "You thought you could hide behind civilians? That's low, even for you." It didn't make sense. What the hell did that mean? Was he a fugitive? An undercover agent? A criminal? All I knew was we were stuck in the middle of something way bigger than we realized. And I didn't know if we were going to make it out. They left us alone for a long time. No windows, just that humming sound outside and the creaking of the wooden walls whenever the wind shifted. Hours passed. I think it was late afternoon by the time the yelling stopped. Then the door opened again, and one of the men walked in, this time without the vest, just a stained gray t-shirt and a pistol at his side. He looked at me for a long time before saying, "He told us what we needed." Then he pointed at me and Tyler and said, "You two got nothing to do with this. We're not going to hurt you, but you need to forget today ever happened." I didn't respond. Just stared at him, trying to read anything in his face. There was nothing. No anger, no guilt, just tiredness. They didn't let us go right away. First they loaded us back into the van, still zip-tied, and drove another hour or so. When they finally stopped, it was on the edge of a dirt road near a ranger station, probably 20 miles from where we'd picked up Mike. They tossed us out, cut the ties, and drove off without another word. I tried memorizing the license plate, but they'd scraped it off, just a blur of metal. Tyler was pale, shaking again. We stumbled toward the station and told the ranger we'd gotten lost hiking and someone gave us a ride out. I didn't want to drag my son into something worse by telling the truth. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That night, in a motel room just outside town, Tyler asked me, "Do you think Mike was a bad guy?" And I didn't know how to answer. Because maybe he was. But maybe he was running from people even worse. The way they interrogated him, methodical, like they'd done it before. The fact that they let us live, I still don't understand it. We never found any reports about a missing man in that area. No local arrests, no news stories. It was like it never happened. But we know it did. Tyler still flinches when he hears tires on gravel. I can't drive past someone hitchhiking without my chest tightening. Sometimes I wonder if picking up Mike saved him or doomed him. And I wonder what would have happened if we'd said no. Would those guys have caught him anyway? Or would they have come after us to make sure we hadn't seen anything? I still see Mike's face sometimes in dreams. Calm, focused, resigned, like he knew this was how it would end. And I can't help but feel like we were used, like we were never in control from the moment we stopped that car. Whatever Mike was into, it was bigger than us, and I've never felt smaller in my life. I told myself I'd forget it, that maybe if I didn't talk about it, it'd fade. But it didn't. And now, a year later, I'm writing this down because I still don't know what really happened out there. I just know we picked up the wrong person. And we were lucky, so damn lucky, that that's all we lost. I'm 36 now, but this happened about 3 years ago when I was still driving around picking up antiques in person. I own a small antique shop in northern Georgia, and back then, I was always chasing rare finds listed online: estate sales, Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist. That's where I found it. A Victorian-era mirror with a carved frame that matched a set I already had in the store. The listing was vague, the photos blurry, but I knew what I was looking at. It was the kind of mirror that could easily go for $800–900 if restored. The seller said $200, cash only. I messaged him immediately. His name was Rick, and his messages were short, but polite. Said he was helping clean out his late grandmother's place in Alabama, and the mirror had just been collecting dust. He didn't want the hassle of shipping and preferred a quick local pickup. I asked for an address, and he sent me one. But then, about an hour before I was supposed to leave, he texted again and asked if we could meet just off the highway instead. Something about construction near the original address. He promised it was easier and faster. Normally I'd say no, but I was already set to go, and I've met plenty of Craigslist sellers in random parking lots, rest stops, you name it. It didn't feel that weird. The new location he gave me was about 15 minutes off I-59, just across the Georgia-Alabama border. When I turned off the main road, I expected to see a house nearby, but it was just a narrow gravel path with thick trees on both sides. No mailbox, no street name, no signs of life. I figured maybe the place was deeper in. I kept driving slowly, watching for any landmarks, but the gravel just stretched on and on, winding through what felt like the middle of nowhere. At one point I tried to check my GPS, and that's when I realized I had 0 bars. No signal. I remember my chest tightening a little. I wasn't scared exactly, but something in my gut said, "This doesn't feel right." I stopped the car when I saw a faded red shed off to the right, just barely visible through a gap in the trees. It looked like the kind of place someone might use for storage, not a house. There were no lights, no signs of anyone, but I figured maybe Rick was inside grabbing the mirror. I honked once, light, just enough to announce I was there. That's when 2 men stepped out from behind the shed. Neither of them looked like what I expected. Rick had said he was in his late 20s, but these guys were older. One bald, heavy-set with a limp, and the other tall and wiry with a thick gray beard. They didn't wave. They didn't smile. They just walked toward my car like they knew I wouldn't be going anywhere. I didn't even open the window. My hand went straight to the gear shift. I wasn't sure what I was doing yet, turning around, backing up, talking to them through the glass. But something in the way they moved, slow, deliberate, not surprised at all, made my stomach twist. The taller one stopped about 10 feet from the hood of my car and tilted his head like he was trying to get a better look inside. The heavy-set guy was closer to my side now, just a few steps from the driver's door. He raised his hand like he was about to knock, but I shook my head hard. I didn't even think. I said, "Nope, I'm leaving," loud enough for them to hear through the glass. That's when I saw the pickup. It was an old, beat-up Ford, mud-splattered and loud as hell, coming up behind me from the direction I came in. I hadn't heard it until then, probably because of how quiet everything else was. It moved slow but steady, and I realized they were trying to block me in. The gravel road was narrow, barely enough for 2 cars. If that truck made it past the bend, I was boxed in. I turned the wheel and tried to reverse, thinking maybe I could beat it, but my tires kicked up more rocks than speed. I didn't have enough space to turn around, and the car was fishtailing. I started to panic. In that split second, I remember locking eyes with the guy on my left. His face didn't show fear or confusion or even anger, just this weird, flat calmness, like he'd done this before. I threw the car into drive and looked for the clearest path out. The shed was to my right, trees on the left, and a half-rotted wooden fence just ahead with a gap where a gate used to be. I went for it. I pressed the gas and heard something crunch under the front bumper. Maybe a log, maybe a rock. I didn't care. I aimed straight for the gap in the fence and drove through, splinters flying across the windshield as I broke into an overgrown field. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might split my ribs open. I didn't stop driving until I saw a paved road again, maybe 2 miles out. Still no signal. I kept checking my rear view, convinced they were following me, but the road behind me stayed empty. When I finally got a single bar of service, I pulled into a Dollar General parking lot and sat there with the engine running for 10 straight minutes, just breathing. I didn't even call anyone right away. I was too afraid of sounding crazy. What was I going to say? Hey, I almost bought a haunted mirror and got abducted instead? It took me a couple of days before I could even bring myself to talk about it. I didn't go to the police, not at first. I didn't have a license plate. I didn't know exactly where I was, and I wasn't hurt. I kept thinking, what if I'm overreacting? What if it was just some weird misunderstanding? But something about their faces, the way they moved, the timing of that truck, it stuck with me. A few nights later, I told my friend Janine, who used to work in social services. She didn't laugh. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You need to report that, now." So I did. I filed a report with the sheriff's office in the county I thought I'd been in. I gave them the original Craigslist screenshots, the burner number Rick had used, and as much detail as I could about the shed, the gravel road, the men's appearances. The deputy who took my statement was polite, but clearly didn't expect anything to come of it. A month later, I got a call from a different officer, this one from a task force in Alabama. He asked if I could describe the property again. When I did, he got quiet. Then he asked if I'd be willing to come in and look at some photos. I said yes. Turns out, that land had been on their radar for a while. It had once belonged to a family that vanished in the 90s, just up and left, no word. Since then, the property changed hands unofficially, used for God knows what. Squatters, drug activity, illegal dumping. But more recently, it had popped up in connection with a trafficking investigation. They'd found signs people had been held there, chains in the shed, mattresses in the dirt, burnt phones. My report matched a pattern. Other women had reported similar setups, listings for rare items, fake names, last-minute meeting changes to isolated spots. I was just the first to escape before anything happened. To this day, I don't know if Rick was one of the men I saw, or if he was even real. The number went dark that same afternoon. The mirror, of course, never existed. I think about that drive sometimes, how close I came to stepping out of the car. What if I'd opened the door? What if I'd waited just 1 minute longer? I still buy antiques, but I never meet strangers in remote areas anymore. Cash isn't worth it. A deal that sounds too good almost always is. And every time I see a Craigslist ad with no clear location, no full name, I scroll past and feel that knot in my stomach again. I got out. A lot of women didn't. I don't take that lightly. I'm not the kind of guy who usually shares stuff online, but this night still messes with my head, and I need to get it out. Back in September 2022, I was driving from San Diego to Phoenix to visit my younger sister, Rachel. She had just had a baby, and I promised I'd be there for the weekend. I left after work on a Friday, figuring I'd avoid the heat driving at night. I had my coffee, a playlist full of old-school rock, and the road all to myself. That stretch of desert between Yuma and Gila Bend can get creepy in the dark, but I've done the drive a few times before. Never thought twice about it. Until that night. Around 1:30 a.m., somewhere near Dateland, I started feeling stiff and figured it'd be smart to pull over, stretch my legs, maybe use the restroom. I spotted a rest stop that looked half dead, just one flickering light over a vending machine, a single bathroom building, and a couple of parked semis in the distance. No other cars. I pulled in, parked near the edge, and got out. The heat was still clinging to the air even that late, dry and heavy. The bathroom smelled like bleach and old piss, but I've seen worse. I did my thing quickly and got back to the car, already eager to get back on the road. As I rounded the back of my car, I noticed something immediately off. My rear passenger side tire looked low. I crouched down to check it and felt my stomach twist. It wasn't low, it was flat. And not just flat, slashed. A clean slice on the sidewall, like it had been done with a knife. I stood there frozen for a second, scanning the lot, but the semis were still parked far off, and no one else was around. Or so I thought. That's when I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. I turned around fast, and a man was already a few feet away. He looked like he'd walked out of the dark itself. Tall, lanky, wearing an old sun-bleached baseball cap pulled low and a flannel shirt too big for his frame. His eyes were pale, almost gray, and he smiled without really smiling. "Trouble with the tire?" he asked, voice dry like he hadn't spoken in days. I nodded, not really knowing what to say. He glanced at the damage and let out a small whistle. "That's no good. I can give you a ride to the nearest gas station, about 15 miles up." I hesitated. Something about him felt off, but standing alone in a desert rest stop at 1:30 a.m. with a slashed tire didn't leave me with many great options. I told him I'd call roadside assistance, but of course, I had no signal. 0 bars. He nodded like he already knew. "Not much luck out here," he said, tapping the side of his neck like that meant something. Then he motioned toward a beat-up old Ford parked on the far end of the lot. "I'm headed that way anyway. Hop in." My gut screamed, "Don't," but I felt cornered. If he'd slashed my tire, and I was starting to suspect he had, what would happen if I said no? I glanced around once more, hoping someone else might magically appear. No one. Just desert and silence pressing in from every direction. I opened the passenger door of his truck slowly, stalling as long as I could. The inside smelled like dust and engine oil. There was a bunch of junk tossed on the floor, empty water bottles, a cracked GPS unit, and a backpack with a torn strap. I sat down stiffly, not leaning back, just waiting for something to feel right. It didn't. The guy got in, turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life. We pulled out of the lot, heading back onto the highway, but within a minute I realized he'd taken the wrong ramp. He turned away from Phoenix. "Hey, I think you went the wrong way," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond at first, just kept driving. His hands gripped the wheel too tight, knuckles pale. After maybe 10 seconds, he said, "Shortcut, trust me." His tone didn't match his words, flat, robotic, like it was rehearsed. I glanced at the dashboard. No GPS, no map, just an old truck radio playing static. I watched the mile markers and signs disappear. We were heading deeper into the desert, not toward anything that looked like civilization. The road turned into cracked asphalt, then gravel. I reached for the door handle, locked. My chest started to tighten. "Look, man," I said. "I think I'll just wait by my car. I changed my mind." That's when he looked at me fully for the first time since we left. His eyes didn't blink. "You don't want to be out here alone," he said. The way he said it, it wasn't a warning. It felt like a threat. I felt a cold chill crawl up my back, and every instinct in me screamed that I was in real danger now. But we were already miles from the rest stop, and the road behind us had disappeared into darkness. My phone still had no signal. I was trapped in this guy's truck, speeding away from everything familiar, into a desert that felt like it was swallowing me whole. I started watching everything. His hands, his eyes, the rear-view mirror. I was trying to calculate my odds if I jumped out, but the truck was going too fast, and the road now was more like a trail, winding through scrubby bushes and hills of sand. The windows were manual. No chance of quietly unlocking and slipping out. The desert outside was pitch black, except for the headlights carving out a tunnel of light ahead. Then I noticed something else. There were no signs, no fences, no power lines, no signs of life at all. It felt like we had crossed into some forgotten pocket of nowhere. "Where exactly is this gas station?" I asked, forcing the question through a dry throat. He grinned, and for the first time it looked unhinged. His teeth were yellow, uneven. "You'll see," he said. I pressed myself back against the seat, and my fingers curled tight into fists on my lap. Every part of me was on high alert. Then he slowed the truck down, almost to a crawl, and pointed to something in the distance. A building, or what used to be one. It was just a skeletal shell with no roof, no lights, like an abandoned trading post. No pumps, no sign of life. "That's it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He stopped the truck about 20 feet from the building. "Out," he said. Just that. No explanation. My heart was pounding in my ears. "I'm not getting out. This isn't a gas station, this is nothing." He stared at me, then reached toward the middle console and pulled out a large hunting knife, rusty, worn, but sharp enough to speak for itself. "Get out," he repeated. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body locked up. He leaned in close, his breath sour and hot, and whispered, "You're not the first one I've brought out here." Something snapped in me. I don't know where the strength came from, but I unlocked the door with a slam of my elbow against the lock, shoved it open, and threw myself out. I hit the dirt hard and rolled, scraping my arms and legs, but I didn't stop. I ran. I heard the door slam behind me, his boots hitting the dirt, his voice yelling something. I don't remember what. I just ran into the black, heart in my throat, lungs burning. The desert wasn't flat there. I tripped down a slope and landed behind some kind of dry wash or gully. I stayed there, hidden under a bush, breathing through my mouth, tasting blood and dust, until I couldn't hear him anymore. I stayed crouched like that for what felt like hours. Every sound made me jump. The wind, distant coyotes, even my own heartbeat. I waited until the sky started turning faintly blue with dawn. When I finally crawled out, I walked for hours, following the rising sun, until I hit a road. A family in an RV picked me up around mid-morning, gave me water, and called the cops. I didn't even know what to tell them, just that someone tried to take me into the desert and that I'd escaped. They found my car at the rest stop, tires slashed just like I said. No fingerprints, no truck, no trace of the guy. I still don't know what he wanted from me exactly. Maybe it was just a mugging that went sideways. Maybe it was something worse. All I know is, if I hadn't trusted my gut and jumped when I did, I wouldn't be here typing this. I drive different now. I don't stop at rest areas anymore, not unless they're full and lit up. And I always check my tires before getting back on the road. I'm not really the type to post stuff like this, but it's been a few weeks and I still can't shake it. Maybe writing it out will help, and maybe it'll keep someone else from falling into the same trap. I'm 34, a single mom to a 2-year-old boy named Riley. It's just us, has been since his dad split during my pregnancy. I've learned to handle a lot on my own, including long drives. This happened earlier this month, on our way from Nashville to visit my sister in Savannah. Riley had fallen asleep in his car seat, and I was cruising through northern Georgia on a quiet highway when I pulled into a rest stop. It wasn't fancy, just a few vending machines, some picnic tables, and a restroom building surrounded by thick trees on all sides. It was late afternoon, the kind of golden hour where everything feels a little softer, a little quieter, peaceful almost, at least at first. Riley had just woken up and started fussing, and I could smell that his diaper needed changing. The restroom didn't have one of those fold-down changing tables, so I decided to just do it in the back seat with the door open. We were the only car there at the time, which I honestly found comforting. I like quiet places when I travel. Less stress, fewer people. I changed him quickly, gave him some apple slices, and put him back in his seat with his favorite stuffed fox. He was getting drowsy again, and I figured we'd be back on the road in 10 minutes, tops. I shut the door gently, not wanting to wake him. That's when I heard it. This faint, muffled sound coming from the trees behind the restroom building. At first I thought maybe it was an animal, but then it got a little louder and I stopped in my tracks. It was a baby crying, not screaming in pain, but that repetitive, desperate little wail that tiny babies make when they're cold or hungry. It sounded close, maybe just 20 or 30 feet beyond the fence that marked the edge of the rest stop. My chest tightened. I looked around and still didn't see any other cars or people. Something about that felt off. Who would leave a baby out there? My brain started racing, flipping through every possible scenario. Maybe someone abandoned it? Maybe it was a prank. But mostly I just felt pulled, like every part of me was screaming to go help. I hesitated, standing at the edge of the grass where the pavement ended and the woods began. The crying kept going, no louder, no quieter, just steady and weirdly consistent. I stepped over the short wooden fence and took maybe 5 or 6 slow steps into the trees. The sound seemed to come from deeper in, but the second I moved forward, something cold washed over me. Not a breeze, something internal, like my gut suddenly clamped down. It wasn't fear exactly. It was that awful sinking feeling you get when you realize something's wrong, but can't explain why. I paused, turned my head back toward the parking lot, and froze. There was a man crouched next to my car, right by the rear passenger door, Riley's door. I could barely make out his face, but he was wearing a dark hoodie, and he was low, like he was trying to stay hidden. One of his hands was already on the door handle. For a split second, my brain didn't catch up with what I was seeing. I just stood there, like I'd been yanked out of a dream. Then everything hit me at once. The sound in the woods, the fact that I was out of view, the silence of the rest stop. My heart dropped. I screamed. I didn't even think, I just screamed loud and sharp, and sprinted back toward the car like my legs had a mind of their own. He jumped when he saw me, like I'd startled him. He stumbled back, then took off around the restroom building without ever looking at me. I didn't chase him. I was shaking too hard, and all I could think about was Riley. I yanked the door open. He was still asleep, thank God, completely unaware of what just happened. I slammed the door shut and locked all of them, then jumped into the front seat and locked those too. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely hold the keys. I started the car, pulled out of there fast, and didn't look back. I didn't stop driving until I saw a well-lit gas station about 20 minutes down the road, where I parked near the front door and just sat there, trying to breathe. After I calmed down a little, I called the police. I felt stupid at first. I wasn't even sure what I was reporting. I didn't get a good look at the guy, and technically, nothing happened. But when I told the dispatcher everything, including the crying baby in the woods, her tone shifted immediately. She got very serious, very fast. She told me to wait where I was and that a deputy would come meet me. When he arrived, I told him the whole story again, and I'll never forget the way he nodded, almost like he'd heard it before. That's when he told me something that made my blood run cold. He said it was a known tactic, something that's been happening at remote rest stops and truck stops. Traffickers and predators using recorded baby cries to lure women into the woods. Especially women with kids, because they're more likely to react. He said I wasn't the first person to report something like this, and that I probably scared the guy off before anything worse could happen. I remember sitting there, holding Riley tight against my chest, trying to keep my hands from shaking. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I came to walking further in. What would have happened if I hadn't turned back when I did? What if I'd been just a few seconds slower? It messes with your head, you know? Feeling like you almost slipped into some awful alternate timeline without even realizing it. I didn't end up continuing the trip that day. I called my sister and told her something had come up, then booked a cheap motel nearby and pushed the dresser in front of the door before I went to sleep. I kept Riley in bed with me, one arm wrapped around him the whole night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that fake baby cry in the back of my mind. It's hard to explain how violating it feels. Not just that someone tried to mess with me, but that they used something so instinctive, so deeply human, to do it. They used the sound of a baby crying, knowing it would pull me in like a magnet. That messes with you in a way nothing else does. Since then, I've been replaying it over and over. Did I hear leaves crunching behind me and just ignore it? How long was he watching us? Did he follow us off the highway? I don't have the answers, and maybe that's the worst part. It didn't feel like a random guy wandering through a rest stop. It felt planned, intentional, like I was a target the second I pulled in. I installed dash cams the day after it happened. I don't stop at remote rest areas anymore. If Riley needs changing or a break, I'll wait until we're somewhere public, with people, cameras, lights. It might take longer, but I'll never make that mistake again. What scares me the most is knowing how many women might fall for it, especially moms. We're so tuned in to the sound of our kids crying that hearing it anywhere else short-circuits our logic. And these people know that. They use it. They count on it. I've posted about it in a few mom groups, and almost every time, someone comments saying they've heard of similar things. Sometimes it's a baby. Sometimes it's a child's voice calling for help. It's all designed to pull you out of sight, to get you alone. So yeah, I guess that's my story. It still creeps me out to think about how close it came to going the other way. I don't know who that man was. I don't know if he was working alone. But I do know that if I hadn't turned back when I did, Riley might not be here. I might not be here. And the scariest part is, we would have just vanished. Another unsolved case. Another woman who disappeared at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere. So please, if you ever hear a baby crying in the woods, don't go looking. Don't play into it. Just get in your car and go. I'm a travel nurse, 39 years old, and I've been on the road for over a decade now. I've stayed in hundreds of motels across the country, some decent, most forgettable, and a few I'd rather erase from my memory entirely. This happened in late September of last year. I had just left a contract in Tucson and was heading to a new job near El Paso. It was one of those long stretches of highway where the desert feels endless, and the radio cuts in and out. Around 9 p.m., and I pulled off I-10 into a little town called Deming, New Mexico, and checked into a roadside motel called the Desert Palms Inn. It was nothing fancy, just 2 rows of single-story rooms and a flickering neon sign. But it was cheap, and I was too tired to be picky. The front desk was run by an older guy named Don. He had one of those voices like sandpaper and smelled like stale coffee and cigarettes. After checking me in, he handed me a room key, an actual metal key, not a card, and said, "You're in 212, end of the second row. No breakfast, no pets, no noise after 10. I nodded, thanked him, and drove around to the back. The lot was half empty, which didn't surprise me. This wasn't exactly tourist season. I remember seeing only one other car parked near my room, a beat-up gray Chrysler with no plates. That stuck with me. I'm used to odd things in motels, but an unregistered car gave me a weird feeling right away. The room was what you'd expect. Thin carpet, floral curtains that hadn't been updated since the 90s, and a bedspread with cigarette burns. But I was too beat to care. I took a shower, heated up a gas station burrito in the microwave, and climbed into bed. I left the TV on low. Some old black and white western was playing, just for background noise. I remember checking the time before I dozed off. It was 11:48 p.m. I didn't expect to sleep well. I rarely do my first night in a new place, but I definitely didn't expect what happened a few hours later. At exactly 2:06 a.m., I remember because I looked at my phone. I woke up to this loud, violent banging. It sounded like someone slamming their fists or maybe even kicking hard against a wall. At first I thought it was coming from the parking lot, like a fight or someone trying to break into a car. But then I realized it was coming from the room directly next to mine. Along with the banging, I could hear this crying. Not sobbing, not loud, weirdly muffled, like someone was trying to cry without being heard. I froze for a second, sitting up in bed, listening. Then I heard it. A woman's voice, low, hoarse, barely a whisper. "Please, help me." And then another loud thud, like something heavy hitting the floor. I didn't know what to do at first. I'm not the type to jump to conclusions, but it really sounded like someone was in serious trouble. I grabbed my phone and called the front desk. It rang 4 times before Don picked up, voice groggy like I'd just woken him. I told him exactly what I was hearing: banging, crying, a woman whispering for help in the room next to mine. He was quiet for a second, then said, "There's nobody in that room, man. Room 214's been vacant for a few days." I told him I could hear someone right now, clear as day, and he just sighed and said, "You're probably hearing the pipes. Old place like this, sounds travel weird." Then he hung up. Just like that. No offer to come check it out, no concern. Nothing. That didn't sit right with me. I put on my shoes, stepped out into the cool desert air, and looked over at the room next door, 214. The lights were off, blinds shut tight, no movement. I walked up and knocked, not loud, just enough for someone to hear me if they were inside. No answer. I knocked again, this time a little harder. Still nothing. But the second I stepped back to look at the window, everything went dead silent. No more banging. No crying. Just stillness. The kind that makes your skin crawl. It was like someone had been watching me from inside and decided to stop making noise the moment I got close. I stood there for a while, trying to make sense of it. The silence felt heavier than the noise. Eventually I walked back into my room, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall we shared. I pressed my ear against it, listening. At first, nothing. Then, so faint I almost thought I imagined it. I heard a soft creaking, like footsteps moving slowly across the carpet, followed by that same whisper again. "Please." Just that. One word. Then silence. That time it felt like the voice was directly behind the wall. I barely slept for the rest of the night. I left the lights on, sat in the chair facing the door, and just waited for the sun to come up. By the time morning came, I was exhausted. Around 7:30, I finally convinced myself I must have misheard things, maybe dreamed part of it. Maybe there really were weird pipes like Don said. But when I stepped outside to check out of curiosity, room 214 looked different. The door was slightly ajar, just barely, but enough that it wasn't fully latched. I looked around. No other guests in sight, no staff. I hesitated, then walked up and gave the door a gentle push. The room was completely clean. I mean, fresh. Bed made perfectly, new towels folded on the rack, trash bins empty. No signs that anyone had been there, let alone whatever the hell I'd heard hours earlier. I went straight to the front office. Don was there, sipping coffee and watching something on an old boxy TV behind the counter. I asked him again, directly, if room 214 had been occupied the night before. He didn't even look up. Just shook his head and said, "Told you, it's been empty for 3 days." I asked if housekeeping had gone in early to clean it that morning. He frowned. then turned to the monitor showing the parking lot cams. "No one's touched that room," he said. "Keys are still on the hook." I asked if he could check the system to be sure, and he gave me this tired look before flipping through a worn-out binder. "Last checkout was Monday. Today's Thursday. You're the only one staying in that wing." I don't know why, but I felt this pressure in my chest, like I needed someone else to witness what I had seen and heard. I told him I'd heard a woman crying, that someone was banging on the wall. He leaned back in his chair and said, "This place is old. Pipes creak, vents echo. People hear things all the time. But it wasn't just noise. I heard her. I felt her voice through the wall, the same way you can feel sound in your bones when someone whispers close." He wasn't interested. Said I could call the cops if I was that bothered. So I did. When the police showed up, I explained everything. 2 officers came, one older, one maybe my age. They asked if I'd been drinking, which I hadn't. Then they checked the room. Nothing. Completely empty. They even pulled the guest logs from Don, and just like he said, room 214 had no check-ins for the past 3 days. No key missing, no cleaning scheduled. The older officer told me I might have caught a transient slipping in and out, maybe through a back window, but that didn't make sense either. The room was spotless. The windows locked from the inside. No footprints, no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. Nothing. I left that morning and haven't stayed in a motel like that since. These days, I pay extra for chain hotels, even if it means a longer drive. I never got any answers about what happened that night. Maybe it was a transient. Maybe my mind played tricks on me after a long drive. But here's the thing that keeps me up sometimes. I know the sound of someone begging for help. I've heard it in hospitals. I've heard it from patients in real pain. What I heard that night wasn't a trick of the pipes or echoes in the vents. It was real. And whatever happened in room 214, I was the only one who heard it. Or maybe, the only one who still could. I was 27 when it happened. Just a few months earlier, I'd been accepted into a PhD program in environmental engineering at the University of Colorado Boulder. It was a big deal for me. I'd worked my ass off through undergrad and 2 years of research assistant gigs to get to that point. The drive from Tennessee to Colorado was supposed to be a fresh start. I had my old Honda Civic packed with books, clothes, and a few boxes I couldn't bring myself to ship. I split the drive into 3 days, and that second day, the stretch across Kansas, was when things went sideways. It was late August, and the sky was that weird mix of overcast and sun that makes everything feel a little too quiet. I remember the exact moment I saw the car. I was maybe 20 miles west of Hayes, on one of those long 2-lane highways that just cut through cornfields like a ruler on paper. There was barely any traffic. 1 car every 15 minutes, if that. The broken-down car was an older sedan, navy blue, hood popped open, steam or smoke faintly curling out. A guy stood next to it, waving both arms. Not frantically, but enough to make me slow down. He had on a white t-shirt and jeans, and from a distance he looked young, maybe 30s, maybe even younger. I didn't want to stop. I had this instinct in my gut telling me to keep driving, but there was also this weight of guilt pressing on me. What if it were me out there? I pulled over about 20 feet ahead of him, keeping my car running. I cracked the window a few inches and called out, "You need me to call someone?" He jogged up a bit, but stopped halfway, hands up like he didn't want to spook me. "Nah, man, just need a jump. Battery's dead. You got cables?" His voice was casual, almost friendly with a slight southern drawl. Still, I didn't like the way he kept glancing behind me, like he was checking something. I hesitated, eyes scanning the endless fields on both sides of the road. No other cars in sight. No houses. Just open land and this guy. But against my better judgment, I nodded and said, "Yeah, hold on." I walked back toward my trunk, cursing myself under my breath. I had just opened the trunk and was reaching for the jumper cables when I heard a sound I still can't describe properly. Not footsteps exactly, but movement. A rustle, maybe. Fast. From the tall grass on the passenger side of the road, a second man came out of nowhere. He was bigger than the first guy, wearing a flannel shirt and holding what I first thought was a metal rod. It took me a second to realize it was a tire iron. My heart shot into my throat. I dropped the cables and sprinted. I didn't think. I just ran straight back to the driver's side, slammed the door, hit the lock, and started the engine. Thank God I hadn't turned it off. In the rearview mirror, I saw both men moving toward me, one from each side, like they'd done this before. I threw the car into drive and hit the gas without checking if the road was clear. I didn't care. The Civic lurched forward, tires squealing slightly on the hot asphalt. I saw the guy in the white t-shirt reach out, like he was trying to grab the side mirror, but he missed by inches. The other guy, the one with the tire iron, slammed the metal against my back bumper, but I didn't stop to see the damage. I just kept going. My hands were shaking on the wheel, and my mouth was dry like cotton. I remember looking in the rear view and seeing them standing there watching me, not even yelling, just staring like they were annoyed their plan didn't work. I drove for maybe 10 minutes before I even thought to breathe properly again. My heart was hammering, and I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that Navy sedan suddenly speeding up behind me. But it never came. I pulled into the first gas station I saw, some tiny, dusty place with a single pump and a convenience store that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. I parked right by the front window, got out, and walked inside trying to look normal, even though I could feel my legs shaking. The woman behind the counter was probably in her 60s, wearing a faded Kansas City Royals cap. She looked up and just said, "You all right, hon?" I nodded, then shook my head. "No, I mean, something weird just happened. I think two guys tried to trap me." I told her everything, right there at the counter. She didn't interrupt, just kept listening with this serious look on her face. When I finished, she sighed and said, "You're lucky. You really are. That stretch of road, we've heard stories. Last week, a woman disappeared out there. Car was found with the door open, purse inside. No sign of her." That made the hair on my neck stand up. She picked up the landline phone behind the counter and said, "I'm calling the sheriff." Sheriff's deputy showed up 20 minutes later. Older guy, gruff voice, boots dusty like he'd walked through half the county. He took down my statement, asked for the location, descriptions, everything. When I mentioned the Navy sedan and the guy with the flannel shirt, he let out this tight breath and muttered something like, "Third time this week." That hit me hard. I wasn't the first. He said they'd been investigating a series of similar reports all along that same highway. Setups like mine. Some people stopped. Some never made it to their destinations. He didn't say it outright, but I could tell from the look in his eyes. Not all those stories had an ending like mine. I spent nearly an hour at that gas station. The deputy took photos of the scuff mark on my bumper and the cables I'd dropped in the trunk. He asked if I wanted to file a full report, and I said yes. Not just because of what happened to me, but because I kept thinking about that woman the clerk had mentioned. Her car found abandoned. No trace of her. What if I had stopped 10 feet closer? What if I hadn't locked the doors fast enough? It was like my brain kept replaying alternate endings, and every version ended with me vanishing into that field. Just another face on a missing persons board. I ended up staying the night in a cheap motel nearby. I couldn't bring myself to keep driving that day. The room smelled like bleach and mildew, but I didn't care. I double-checked the locks 3 times, left the TV on for noise, and barely slept a wink. Every sound outside made me jump, A car door slamming, footsteps near the stairwell, even the wind. I was wired, like my body wouldn't let me relax. I kept seeing that guy's face. The fake concern. The way he'd said, "You got cables?" Like we were just two guys helping each other out. It was all so rehearsed, polished. That's what scared me most. The next morning I drove the rest of the way to Boulder without stopping once, not even for gas. I had filled the tank before Kansas, thankfully. I made it, eventually, and settled into my new apartment. But that day stuck with me. It's been almost a year now, and I still think about it every time I see someone broken down on the side of the road. I want to help, but I never stop. I can't. The world's different once you see what some people are willing to do, how far they'll go just to catch someone off guard. It changes the way you look at strangers. I never found out if those guys were caught. I called the sheriff's office once just to ask if there was any update, and they told me the investigation was ongoing. That's it. I never saw anything in the news. No arrests, no closure, just an open stretch of highway where people disappear. I guess I was one of the lucky ones. Or maybe just one of the fast ones. Either way, if you're ever driving through Kansas and see a car with the hood up, keep moving. Trust your gut. I ignored mine for 10 seconds, and it almost cost me everything.